This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to human rights activist and writer Anna Diamond. Anna was held for 8 months for no reason whatsoever in one of the most brutal prisons in the world, Evin prison in Iran. Anna's going to speak to us about that and explain how this all happened despite the fact she was completely innocent. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront, or you can go to popularfront.co/support. So Anna, let's go back to the very start. You ended up in a really bad situation in Iran. Take us back to the start. How did this all happen?
So in the summer of 2014, my family and I decided to visit Iran because my dad had been invited to the International Mahdaviyat Conference, which is kind of where all the scholars who focus on Abrahamic religions come together. Well, not all, but Iran-centric ones, and then they discuss their latest research or findings or philosophies around the Messiah and Abrahamic religions. And so my dad actually is an Islamic scholar, but he is quite different from those that you see in the Islamic Republic. So, but at the time there was no friction. So we went to Iran in the July of 2014. But we went at different times. So my parents went first and I came second because I was coming from the US where I was studying, a semester abroad. I was at a university then. And when I arrived in Iran, interestingly, just immediately, they were really suspicious of where I was coming from. So I had a layover in Turkey. So, they didn't know I was coming from the US. And they started asking if they could see my laptop and if they could look at my phone. And so I should notify, a little bit of context. I hadn't been to Iran for 16 years. I was born in Iran, but we left Iran when I was 4 years old. I hadn't been to Iran for 16 years, so I couldn't speak Farsi. I could understand it, but I couldn't speak it. But then, obviously, when you look at me, I look quite, I'm the quintessential Persian/Middle Eastern woman. So I think the officers were a bit suspicious because I looked Iranian, but then I couldn't speak Farsi. So they pulled me aside and they wanted to see my passports, not only the Iranian one, but also the European one. And at that point, they just said, we can't find you in the population registry. So they couldn't admit me into the country, give me an entrance clearance. So I was in the airport the whole day. At the end, they seized my passports, my laptop, and my phone as part of this undisclosed investigation. And they said that they would get back to me in a few weeks' time. So that was the very, very first impression I had of the country. I hadn't been to Iran, as I said, for many years, so I didn't know how the country is run. So I kind of thought maybe it's normal. But then we kind of went with it. And for the next 12 or so months, we were continuously followed around. We always didn't know that we were being followed around. And when I say we, I mean my parents and I. But then we were also asked to attend these interrogations, which again, at the time, I didn't know what they were about. But all of it kind of led up to our formal arrest, which occurred in January 2016. And so in hindsight, obviously, I see that there was a lot of paranoia in Iran, and they probably, they were suspicious of kind of dual nationals and foreign nationals because of the ongoing Iran nuclear deal talks. So in 2015, Iran and the West, so that would be Germany, Russia, UK, US, and a few other countries, they kind of came together to sign the JCPOA. And during that time, the Iranian security apparatus was just very, very hostile towards anyone who was a foreigner or a dual national.
Right. So what happened when they actually, properly arrested and detained you? What were they saying?
So as I said, they had asked us to attend interrogations in these safe houses across Tehran before January 2016, so the date of our arrest. And when I would go to these interrogations, I mean, Jake, it was so shady. I'm surprised I was so naive at the time. But so, for example, they would call us from a private number, tell us to come to this corner shop, and that the owner of the corner shop would give us an address. And then, we would do what we were told because we were given the impression that if we kind of cooperated with what they were saying, we would be eligible to leave the country eventually. And during those interrogations, my parents and I were separated, so I really didn't know what they were being asked. But I was specifically asked about my activities in the UK, if I knew Catherine Ashton. I was involved in UK youth politics at the time, so I had photos with individuals or politicians like, for example, David Cameron, and they were like, "Do you know David Cameron?" And at the time, they didn't tell me that they had these photos, and they were just building up a fabricated case against me. And so I just thought I thought it was just like a part of the whole familiarization process, where they want to know what I've been up to abroad, and I would just give them all that I had, all the information.
I mean, it does kind of sound naive, but at the same time, you hadn't done anything wrong. You're not a terrorist. You're not a spy. I guess, as a young woman, you had no reason to think that they would be investigating you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I don't know if I mentioned, but I was only 19. And so a person who's 19, who's never been to Iran, who isn't really involved in Middle Eastern affairs, who has studied film studies and is just mainly involved in UK domestic youth politics, and literally just trying to network with people, not even trying to launch a political career or anything. So, obviously, I didn't know what was going on. And I certainly, as you said, I wasn't a spy. I hadn't committed any national security crimes or anything like that. So I really didn't have a source, a reason to be worried. But eventually, in January 2016, 4 days before, and this is really, really interesting to me, 4 days before, the US Obama administration paid Iran $1.7 billion in exchange of a few Iranian Americans. 4 days before that, I was arrested. And so this gave me the impression, now it gives me the impression that we are treated literally like supermarket products. So you give one, you take one, you give one, you take one. And then that involves exchange of money, exchange of goods, exchange of assets. But at the time, again, I didn't know any of it. I did know that Jason Rezaian, so an Iranian American journalist for the Washington Post, I knew that he was in the headlines a lot. He had made a lot of, so he was the Tehran bureau editor for the Washington Post. And so he was kind of very well known. And then he had been arrested on espionage charges. So I was following his case, but I had no idea that something similar would happen to me because I was not a journalist and definitely not in the same caliber as Rezaian. So anyway, but yeah, so in January 2016, I was arrested on charges that were not even disclosed to me at the time. I didn't know where I was up until the 35th day. So they didn't tell me that I was in Evin prison, which is very notorious for its mistreatment of political prisoners. And it's actually a ground where a lot of blood has been shed during the past 60, 70 years. So even before the Islamic Revolution. And in my first hearing, I was told that I was facing the charges of espionage, apostasy, and collaboration with the hostile government of England. And so the espionage was for MI6, CIA, and Mossad.
All of
It's
them.
like I know, I was like the super spy going around spying on all hugely important Iranian officials and just providing information to Mossad, CIA, MI6. Here you come. Here it comes. Take it. And the way they justified it was that the UK had been grooming me since I was 15. So I had been in training for 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And so they really, I mean, to be fair, looking back, I think even though they knew what they were doing was fabricated, I think they did create a very impressive case, because they literally took multiple different aspects of my life and glued them together by force and created this super spy narrative. Like, for example, I'll just give you an example. On my 18th birthday, I went to a paintball session with my friends. So, you carry the plastic guns and you shoot each other with colors and whatever. And we were wearing the paintball gear, which is kind of heavy, and because you have to protect yourself. Anyway, so we took a lot of photos during the paintball event, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, so the IRGC, they said that I had been trained by NATO, and these were the photos from the NATO training. And I was just shocked. I was like, either these people are incredibly stupid, or they are so smart that they are putting me through all of this just to, get more information. Because basically what ends up happening is that while you're trying to explain that it's not NATO, you were doing this and you were doing that, like, out of all the things that you provide, they take new bits of information and then they use it against you again. It's a tactic for them.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember when I was arrested in Turkey, obviously, not nowhere near as bad as or on the same scale as what happened to you, but like it's a similar tactic they were using. So, we had a load of cash in like very small denominations because you're in Southeast Turkey, the war was on, often the electric was being turned off, so you can't just go to a cash point. So they were like, right, well, clearly you're paying Kurdish militants for I don't even know what. And I was like, what? Like, what? Like, why the fuck would we pay Kurdish militants, right? So then I was saying, well, like you guys, like Turkey itself has written a report saying that apparently the PKK makes millions each year from drug trafficking and whatever. So why the fuck would they need some random like white Western journalist to come and give them money, right? But then it's like, oh, you know about that? Are you involved? So like you said, it's like just a constant slippery slope, right? You just once you're in, you're in.
Absolutely. Yeah, so after I was released and I returned back to the UK in 2018, and then in 2019 I began like my activism work, I figured that some of the former hostages and formerly detained individuals, they gave these talks about how dumb the Iranian security officers are, and the whole organization and the IRGC, and how inept they are and incompetent because they confuse us to spies and whatnot. But I actually want to see the other side of it. I don't think they are stupid when they are doing these. I think they are very sophisticated and they do it with incredible calculation. I think it would be easy for us to say they are just very foolish. They don't know who's a spy. They don't know, but I actually think they 100% do it intentionally. It brings them money. It brings them notoriety. It brings them incredible media attention. So, for example, with the Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's case, an Iranian British charity worker who's been arrested in Iran for the past 5 years, for example, that her case alone has garnered Iran worth a media attention that is worth millions, and they've got it for free. Now, some might argue that, but that's negative publicity. Listen, Iran doesn't want good publicity in the Western media. Like, they don't care.
I don't care.
What
Yeah.
they want, exactly, like what they want is they want to be vilified by the West so that they can vilify the West in their own media, and then they can create this soft war, Cold War tactics where they can legitimize and justify their own territorial expansion in the Middle East. They can justify why they keep arresting dual nationals. They can keep justifying why they, send drones to American military sites in Iraq. So like it gives them all these excuses, but then like it's very disappointing when former detainees come and say, "Oh, they're just dumb." No, they're not dumb. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. With any authoritarian regime like that, they're not stupid. They know that arresting journalists is like, they know that the journalists are not gonna like do anything other than report on what's going on. But that's what they want. They want to create this fear so that anyone else that goes there says, "Well, fuck that. We better not, because if we report on the war crimes they're actually doing, then we'll go to prison and it will be hell." Like you said, it's very calculated. Anyone that thinks they're stupid is wrong. I think it's all a part of their plan to like limit information and basically just keep getting away with war crimes, I think. You said like you kind of, you got pulled in, you got questioned. What happened at the moment when you realized like, right, I'm actually going to prison now? Like, how did that all play out?
Oh my God. I still get goosebumps when I think of that day, Jake. I mean, I laugh about it because humor is a great coping mechanism, but in reality, it was incredibly traumatizing. So I remember, so at the time before I was arrested, I was doing little volunteer works with the UN and with some local newspapers, just because I thought, if I'm going to be in Iran under a travel ban, I might as well use my time wisely and like get to know the country or maybe learn the language. So on that very day when I was arrested, 12th of January 2016, I was going to my internship place, which was the FAO, so the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. And I remember on that day, I woke up quite early. I was like, hey, I'm just gonna paint my nails red because I was feeling that way on that day. And so I head out. It was like 7:30 a.m. And I mentioned the nail polish because I'm going to return to it. I head out and walk toward my local tube station, metro station. And next thing I know, a car pulls in front of me, like a van. And a woman comes out. And by the way, I had my headphones on and I was listening to some hip hop music. I don't know, like a rap music or something. I was just vibing my way through life in Tehran. And then this lady pops out. She pulls out my headphones and I'm like, "Excuse me, do I know you?" And she says, "You need to come with us." And like, I thought maybe she was asking for directions. And anyway, long story short, next thing I know, 4 or 5 people come out. One of them has a camera. One of them has a freaking gun. Like that alone, just I was I was going through this fight, flight, freeze mode because I didn't know if I should fight, run away, or just like, let it be what it is and just go with them. But eventually I ended up in the van, and I remember they pressed my head between my knees. And I think at that point I was just, I knew something was terribly wrong because there was no reason for that kind of hostility in the first few minutes. If there isn't, a reason for worry. And then they took me to the court. And unlike other famous dual national cases, I was actually taken to the special clerical court because my father, as I mentioned, is an Islamic scholar, and my grandfather was also a cleric. So I come from a family of quite high-profile clerics, and which also kind of made my case quite difficult because the IRGC saw me as one of their own, and and they thought that I was portraying the country by like being subversive and like, you know, doing things that they didn't approve. But in reality, I was never one of their own, because I was brought up in the West. I didn't know Farsi, like, you know, I wasn't involved in any of their activities, but because my grandfather was.
But you're Iranian, but you're British as well, right? It's, you know, it's like you said, dual national. It's, you know, you're as much British as you are Iranian in the eyes of the law anyway, but they didn't care. They disregarded it.
Well, yeah, because Iran doesn't recognize dual nationality.
Right.
I mean, that's what they say, but actually they recognize it when it's of benefit to them, and then they don't recognize it when it's not of benefit to them. So it's kind of like at their discretion when they want to recognize it. I mean, there are plenty of Iranian ministers or special advisors whose children have dual nationalities, who themselves have dual nationality, and they just go on about their life. But then the minute you are arrested as a national security threat, then suddenly they don't recognize your dual nationality, because they know that they would be held accountable if something happened to you. So it's just an easy way for them to evade responsibility. But as I was saying earlier, so a bit of context, my grandfather was one of, it's actually quite difficult to admit this, because I think it puts me on a quite sensitive spot where some think that I've benefited from the system I'm currently criticizing. But I just really want to clarify that I have never benefited from anything. And if anything at all, it has hurt me more than it probably would have had I not been the granddaughter of an Ayatollah. But anyway, so my grandfather was one of the leading figures that led to the Islamic Revolution, and he was alongside Hashemi Rafsanjani and Ayatollah Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei. Like he was the representative of the supreme leader for nearly 40 years in the northwestern part of Iran. So he was a very prominent figure, and so when I was in Iran, whenever I would go to his house, or whenever I was, around his circles, I had to wear a chador. So anyway, when I was tried at the special clerical court, they saw me as like this infiltrator, essentially. And I mentioned my nail polish earlier on because in Islam, nail polish is haram. And so I was there with my chador and me looking like the most perfect hijabi, you see aligning woman who but the attire was just so perfect to kind of camouflage amongst them. But then my red nails popped out. And I remember the officers were constantly looking at my nails, and I was just scraping away the color so aggressively.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, I need to get this off before I go, before I'm seen by the prosecutor, because they will just judge me for it straight out, no doubt.
Jesus Christ. Something so minor, really, you know what I mean? But at the same time, not so much over there. So what happened next? You were then, you were taken straight to court? They put you in a jail or what?
Yeah, so they took me to the court. I saw the prosecutor, one of them, his Hojjatul Islam Zanjani. And then after him, I saw Hojjatul Islam Abdullahi. Abdullahi is the representative of Ibrahim Raisi. Raisi is the Chief Justice of Iran. So he's a very big person, like a big deal. And he actually ran against President Rouhani in 2017 elections as well. So it was quite ironic for me to see him running as president, knowing that he had tried to sentence me to death a year before. Before that. But anyway, so in January 2016, I saw the prosecutors. They asked me if I was a spy. I said, no, I'm not. And that was it. They said, okay, well, as long as you collaborate with us and help us figure out the truth, you're safe. And I said, okay, well, where do I go? What do we do? And they just said, well, you'll see. Anyway, they took me downstairs and they put me in a car. They didn't tell me what they were doing. And I thought I was going home. But then the lady who initially, the lady that early that morning had tried to, drag me into the van, she sat next to me and she said, "We're going to the hotel." And I just said, "Okay, well, whatever that may be." And they put blindfolds on me, and again pressed my head between my knees, and we drove to Evin prison. And later on, I figured that they call Evin Hotel Evin, so Evin Hotel, and they call inmates Mehmun, so guest. So inmates are guests, and the detention center is a hotel.
That's very dark.
It is very dark, yeah. And every single time when I was trying to ask for help, when I was in the solitary confinement or during interrogations, they were always like, "But you're our guest. We're trying to serve you. We're trying to help you." So there's definitely a lot of thought given to it. But so I was taken to a solitary confinement unit, which is run by the IRGC. It's different from the 209 solitary section, which is run by Iran's Ministry of Intelligence. And I have to clarify that because there is a huge distinction between the two. So Iran's Minister of Intelligence is actually the one who should be in charge of Iran's national security. But the IRGC, a small group that started as an insignificant branch of the Iranian armed forces in 1979, has now gained so much traction and influence that they're actually running their own operations. And that's why I call it a deep state, because the IRGC is essentially running everything. But people just don't want to see what's in plain sight, and then they want to pretend that there are still reformists in place, and then you have the hardliners, and you have conservatives, and you have progressives. No, they're all the same, because IRGC is running the show, and you're just the audience. But yeah, so I was taken to solitary confinement. I was in solitary confinement for the next 200 days, and I was in complete isolation. I had no contact with the outside world whatsoever. I didn't have access to a lawyer or to a medical professional, despite the fact that I fainted multiple times in the solitary cell. I developed a severe cardiac arrhythmia. Like, my heartbeat would go up to like 300. And obviously at the time I couldn't count it, but I carried it with me home. It was like an Iranian souvenir. I carried home when I returned to the UK. So whenever I would end up in A&E, they would see that my heart is 300, 350 beats per minute, beats per minute, and that's like danger threshold. But anyway, so I didn't have access to any of that. I would be interrogated up to like 12 hours a day, if not more. And yeah, so during those 8 months, things got quite dark, and then sometimes things got positive, and you were seeing light at the end of the tunnel. But it was really just a roller coaster of horrendous terror, and I will never be able to forgive people that want to either silence people who've gone through that, or to enter the process of victim blaming. And I say that because in our conversation before, you asked me, how did you become a dissident? And I mentioned that I don't know if I would consider myself a dissident. And I said that because the minute you say you're a dissident, some people in Washington or in Westminster or in Brussels, they automatically want to silence you. Like, they don't want to hear it, because they think that you are making their job difficult. They're so fixated on talking about the revival of the JCPOA. Yes, we need to be able to get Iran back to the negotiations table. And usually you hear that from people who have either not lived in Iran
Yeah.
or Iranian or so-called Iranian analysts that have lived in the West for the past like 10, 20 years and don't have any recent first-hand experience of Iran. But when you actually speak with people who have been in Iran or lived in Iran or have, some sort of imprisonment experience, they will tell you the Iranians are hungry for justice and for human rights. Human rights has become this buzzword, and it's been watered down because nobody who actually has the power to do something in reality gives a shit. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but like when you are constantly talking about entering Iran nuclear deal because they are involved in nuclear proliferation, why do you care about nuclear proliferation if you do not care about human rights? Like they go hand in hand. You can't dismiss the other and focus on the other one.
I agree completely, and I honestly get really sick of hearing these kind of think tank like, oh well, if we just normalize ties with blah blah blah, it completely removes the human element to it, or any political think tank. To be honest, it's like whilst people are rotting in the dungeons, getting raped, getting abused, getting sent to prison for nothing, whilst they're all being oppressed, it's like then you shouldn't be talking about anything else yet. Get that out the way first. When that stops, then you can do other things. But of course, that's not how the world works. The West has this kind of like face of like, oh, we respect human rights, but I mean, do they? I mean, the EU is saying about China, oh, it's terrible about the Uyghurs, and then a week later they just rush through a trade deal with the same country that they're criticizing for doing that. It's like it's the same all over the world, I think. And I think going to prison under like an authoritarian regime and then being involved with the think tanks and the diplomats as you will have to be, I think like what you're saying really rings true. It's like, do they actually give a shit about the human rights? I don't know if they do.
Yeah. I mean, it's really disheartening to see because I mean, I don't want to sound cynical, but I know that there are people who have personal incentives in getting Iran sign another JCPOA or getting Iran and the US around the same table. They want to make it seem like it's about protecting the world from another nuclear war. And I'm sure there are actually genuine people who are worried about that. But then the ones that talk the loudest actually have very, very, very important personal incentives. When I was living in Iran, I saw people who were involved with the IRGC because, as I said, they operate like a mafia, right? So if you want to have a successful business, at some point in line, you will have to collaborate with the IRGC. Like there is no way they will allow you to import Maseratis and Bentleys and expensive cars without giving them a huge percentage. Like they will not allow you to do that. There is no way that you will be able to build 20 whatever floor skyscraper in the middle of Tehran without getting an authorization from the IRGC. People want to claim otherwise, but I have seen it, and the entire country of Iran knows this. It is called parti bazi. Like there is an actual term for it. But people who are like, oh, JCPOA, let's protect innocent Iranians and also our own interests. Listen, like I respect that, but there is so much more to it than just signing another deal that is purely transactional. We need to set preconditions, and I don't think we should give any concessions to the IRGC. And if you've noticed, I specifically talk about IRGC because there are plenty of great and genuine people in Iran that want to see their country thrive, right? So they really want to see the country thrive. But unfortunately, IRGC doesn't want the profits of the country to be handed out to the general population or to foreigners. So I think it's just, some people are naive and ignorant to it, and others just blatantly close their eyes from it.
Yeah, well, it's very easy to do when people are actually not faced with the realities of what's going on, whether that be in the trenches or actually in the country. It's very easy for people in DC and London to say this, and this, having never been anywhere near the threat of what that country is actually bringing upon people. I just want to talk a little bit about Evin prison more because I think anyone that has done any research on Iran like knows about this place. It's very notorious. If you don't mind, like maybe you could explain what it was like just day to day there. Like, how were things for you there? What were the conditions like? Did you get to even speak to any other prisoners, or was it just solitary the whole time? Like, maybe give us an idea of what it was like there.
Sure. So, Evin Prison is a huge compound, is the first thing I want to say. So it's not just a single building. It is absolutely massive, and it's located in the north part of Tehran, in like mountainous area. Um, and it's actually quite funny because the minute you step out of Evin Prison and like the front yard of it, you are like met by the sounds of this living and colorful and vibrant city. So like all of that torture and horrendous mistreatment is going on while everyone else is like doing whatever they would do on their daily life. Like it's actually like so crazy that they're happening simultaneously right next to each other. But anyway, so inside Evin prison, the 2A solitary units, they are small cells. I was rotated between multiple cells, but the initial one I was placed in was so small that when I lay down, my head touched one wall and my feet touched the other wall, and I had to like bend my knees a little bit.
Jeez,
Um,
you're not tall.
yeah, exactly. And I'm like 5'7",
Yeah.
so I think I'm quite average. So it was extremely small. I mean, some people have described it as like coffin-like. I think it was definitely bigger than a coffin, but if you're claustrophobic, you will legitimately have a stroke or die or something. Like it is scary. And I was there in January, so I was taken in, and the temperatures were freezing, Jake. Like I kept asking for blankets, for jacket, for anything, because they take everything from you, and you're supposed to wear these prison clothes. And they just kept telling me you're only allowed to get 3 blankets, and the blankets are just like very thin army rugs. Well, not rugs, but like the kind of rough, made of rough material.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
hair almost, right?
yeah, exactly. I think it's quite common in like in Iran or Turkey or that
Yeah, so
region prisons.
I know them blankets, and like the one they gave us had like the Ottoman seal on it, and it was like made of hair basically. I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, like they can't even give you a blanket that's decent.
Exactly. So even the blanket is not comfortable. Like there
Yeah.
is nothing that you can find comfort in. And I think it was like 10 or 15 days into it that I was literally shivering so hard, and I couldn't eat anything. Whatever food they gave me, I literally like threw it up. Like everything would just come back up. And so this lady, one of the guards, female guards, who was like basically running the solitary cells and like giving food to people or whatnot, like she ended up giving me her own coat because she was like, this girl is gonna die of hypothermia or some shit because it was so bad. And so I say that because I want to highlight the fact that even amidst all this like inhumanity and like this horrible negligence and torture and just like being so cruel towards one another, there was still glimpses of light and hope. Like the single act of small kindness that this female guard did toward me, like I will always remember it because it was exactly what I needed at that moment. And even though she's complicit, she's part of literally an organization that runs extrajudicial killings and whatnot. Like I still recognized her act of kindness. But also that gives you an image of how rough the circumstances were because the fact that she gave me her coat was like such a big highlight of the whole month that I just kept talking about it to every single person that asked me about the Evin conditions. But So they give you food. They give you like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which usually is like very grim lentil soup, which doesn't have any lentils. It's just gray water. And so they would also give you like boiled or steamed potatoes. Like, so they would give you food unless they wanted to punish you. At that point, they wouldn't give you food. I remember for 2 days that they didn't give me water, which was like, when they didn't give me water, I was freaking out because my livelihood and lifeline literally depends on what they give me. So there is nothing else that you could eat, not even the blanket. So like you really see the end of desperation. You end up contemplating suicide. You have huge, feelings of guilt. Particularly I had, because I was arrested with my parents. So I was constantly like, I was in this excruciating pain of knowing that I may have caused them this problem, which of course wasn't true. But at the time, I was unaware of it. I was just very naive. And then when they would take you to the interrogation, you would have to put a blindfold on. And if you're a female, you would wear a chador. So you have to put marne, like a headscarf, and then you have to put a chador on top of it. And then they take you to interrogation cells, which is kind of, you have to walk out of the solitary units, probably 100 stairs down. It's literally underneath the ground. Where they interrogate you. And like, while you're taking the steps down, I remember the first time when I went there, I was like, I was expecting the worst. I thought I would get my nails pulled out. I would get ironed. Like, I like, all these things went through my head, because we were literally going beneath the ground where the sun does not shine. And when you're interrogated, you're sat against a wall, so you don't see your interrogators, you just hear them. And they are at least two interrogators. One usually plays the good cop, and one usually plays the bad cop. So the good cop is, oh, we want to help you. You can have dinner with us tonight. You can go home tonight. You can save your father's life tonight. Yada, yada, yada. And the bad cop is the one that says, I'm going to kill you tonight if you don't do what I tell you to do. And they, he would play recordings of my mom crying or my dad screaming.
Christ.
And and they would say that for every answer you're not giving me, we'll be, torturing your mom, or we'll be pulling your dad's teeth. And so like, there was a lot of psychological torture involved. And I think also it's important to highlight that when you are in that sort of an unhealthy environment, to say the very least, for a prolonged period of time, I think you really lose touch of who you are and like what your identity is made of, and your memories and your characteristics and your knowledge of yourself becomes so malleable and so easily manipulated. So I distinctly remember that I was told they had photos of me with, meeting the head of MI6 and Mossad. And they convinced me that I had met with the head of Mossad, to a point where I actually started thinking, did I meet the head of Mossad?
Jeez.
Like, it was so, I know. And people, sometimes when I say this, like some people think that, oh, that's just absurd. But actually it's not absurd, because it's like, if you run a social experiment and you put a human in a singular solitary cell for 8 months, and every single day repeat to them that they are a spy to CIA, for example, or that, rice is red, the food rice is red rather than white. By the end of it, like, easily I could say many would consider that rice may be red. Like, okay, maybe they're not convinced of it, but they will consider it. Now, I don't know if I'm explaining it clear enough, but for example, they would ask me the color of yogurt, and I would say, well, yogurt is white. And he would say, no, yogurt is brown. You've forgotten what yogurt looks like. Like, it literally messes up with your whole thought process. And that's just the very basics of it. So when you come down to what did you do when you were studying abroad in the US, and I would say I was studying in the University of California, and they would repeat to me every single day for 12 hours that no, you were in a Virginia Langley meeting with CIA officers. Like by the 5th month in my head, I was like, fuck, maybe I met someone, you know? So the mental element of it, the psychological element of it is so severe and so destructive that I want everyone to know that psychological torture exists and it's real and it's just as potent and serious as physical torture. I don't want to do disservice to people, or like disrespect to people who have gone through physical torture, because, you know, my dad went through it and I know that it's absolutely horrendous. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that you shouldn't think that psychological torture is any less serious. Because it completely messes up with everything you believe in and you think is right. And just to add, like, some people think that once you come back, everything returns back to normal, but actually there is no normal. Like, you have severe trust issues, you suffer from PTSD. Like, to this very day, I keep away from Iranians. Like, even if they're not even, you know, even if they don't live in Iran, even if they're third culture kids like myself, I just don't want to talk to them because I'm so scared that, I don't know, maybe, you know, maybe they work with IRGC and maybe they're spying on the diaspora communities. Like, so the paranoia is severe, and like I have to do, I don't know, maybe years of unlearning, because I'm not unlearning, but like dismantling of this feeling that I've been put through.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to send you mad, right? And when that happens, you can admit to anything. I mean, you even see American police do it. They're very not maybe not on the same kind of level as in like playing, you know, audio of your parents being tortured to or whatever. But the mind games, they do the same. They're like, you know, convincing someone, trying to get them to confess. And it's like, if you end up doubting yourself, well, that opens up the gates to anything, right? Like you could say, yeah, I am a spy, and then they're kind of vindicated in what they've been doing to you.
I think the silver lining in my experience or my ordeal was that in the middle, so in March, 3 months after my arrest, it was the Iranian notorious, so the Persian New Year. And I don't know why, but for some reason, my interrogators decided to send me to the public ward for the duration of the new year. I'm assuming because they wouldn't be working, and so there was no point in me being in the solitary confinement, not being interrogated. So they sent me to the women's ward, where I met other political prisoners, namely, you know, Narges Mohammadi, who is a very famous political activist. She found a human rights organization with Shirin Ebadi, who then went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003. I met with Atena Faradani, who is a very prolific writer and an artist. Like, I was surrounded by this great atmosphere of intellect and humility and courage. And I think that gave me a new level of strength, that whatever it may be that comes my way, like, I know so many women and women of much higher prestige and, you know, reputation and greatness have gone through it before me. And I failed to mention early on that, like, so in May, again, I'm like jumping around in the timeline because my my brain is like, when I review the memories, it's like it jumps from one point to another. But like in May, after I was transferred back from from the public ward solitary confinement, in May I was sentenced to death. But back in March, I didn't know that I had been sentenced to death. So when I told these women in the public ward that, you know, I was facing espionage, apostasy, collaboration with hostile government of England, they asked me how long do I think I will be sentenced to, and I said I have no idea. Like, I haven't done anything, so like why should they sentence me to anything? And I remember there were a few members of alleged members, I should say, of MAK, so People's Mujahideen group, or I mean, I don't know the exact name, but basically they're like a banned dissident / militia group. I really don't know, because like the information of them is just very it's limited, and then it's not all verified. So anyway, but like allegedly MAK members, and I remember one of them told me that, listen, there is no way you can get out of that without at least 10 years. And so she told me that, you know, her father, her brothers, all of them had been executed. She had been given 15 years of prison. She had never seen her daughters graduate or when they got married. She wasn't in the wedding ceremony. She missed everyone's funeral. Like, she was just in that prison for 15 years, and she didn't know for how long she was going to be there. And then there were plenty of others. You know, you had Bahar Hidayat, who led the 2009 Green Movement, the youth part of the Green Movement. She had been sentenced to 8-9 years simply for being a student activist and organizing 2009 youth engagement, where people wanted to know what the hell happened with their votes when they voted for Mousavi and suddenly Ahmadinejad was sworn in for a second term. I mean, it was, I don't know if you remember that part, but it was called the 2009 Green Movement in Iran. It was quite huge, yeah. So anyway, so they taught me that no matter what I am told in solitary confinement, I need to stay confident in myself and in what I know to be true. And so they told me, if you know something isn't true, don't let that truth slip away, because they are questioning you. And so when by the end of March, they suddenly took me back to solitary confinement, I was fulfilled. Like, I was literally full of wisdom that I had been given by these incredible women. And after that, like, no matter how much the IRGC tried to force me into a false confession, or when they said, listen, like, if you do not say this thing, like, you will be hanged, I just thought it's better. I mean, I know this sounds very like maybe banal or like corny, but like, I thought it's better to die anonymously than to die for something you haven't done. Like, for me, it was just so absurd that I would say I'm a spy and they wouldn't kill me.
No, absolutely. It's like, you know, when an authoritarian regime calls you a terrorist and you know you're not one, it's infuriating. And I agree. It's like, you should never just agree just to make it easier. Like, whilst, you know, it might sound to you corny, I don't think it does at all. It's like, it's better to die, you know, stating your innocence, than to fold and then be killed anyway, right?
Yeah, well, I said die anonymous. What I meant by anonymous is that not as someone known to have like committed a national security thing or like betrayed her second country and whatnot. Like, I preferred to that this thing would be wrapped up without anyone questioning my innocence. I rather just kind of let them do what they want to do instead of me partaking in it and doing what they are forcing me to do, which is like a false confession. But of course, I do also acknowledge that had I not been moved to the woman's ward, things could have actually had a very different turn. So I think it's, yeah, I just want to, address just how amazing the women there were and are. And I think for the most part, they inspire me to do what I'm doing today, even though, of course, they were from all sides of the political spectrum. And I didn't agree with most of them when it came to political views. But that doesn't mean that they are not like an absolutely amazingly inspiring human beings, because they believe in something and they stand by it. And they believe in it because they think it is going to do greater good for the greater number of people. Now, you could argue that for the Islamic Republic too, I suppose, or the IRGC, but actually IRGC knows that what they're doing is not for the greater good of greater people. Like, they know what they're doing is for their own good rather than for the population. It doesn't take a genius to see that the country of Iran is literally dying slowly. Like, they see it and they still continue doing what they've done for the past 40 years.
Yeah, definitely. It's beyond politics when stuff like that is happening. It's, people will throw this kind of weird, like, political ball around, like, oh, yeah, well, Iran is doing this, but what about America? It's like, yeah, fuck America as well. Like, it's not about that. It's about humanity. Like, when you're doing stuff like that, like murdering your own citizens and oppressing them, they're not doing it for anyone other than, the people that are ruling. It's just, I don't know. I don't think you can even question that. What was it like finding out, like, yeah, they want to kill you, like they're sentencing you to death?
Before I answer that question, I just want to say that, Jake, you can be critical of the US and also be critical of Iran. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. Like,
yeah, of course. But people are so wrapped up in their own pathetic political ideology that they don't realize that. You know what I mean?
It's like, it's quite similar to, for example, when I sometimes tweet or make media interviews where I say Iran is committing human rights crimes, then people say, oh, what about US sanctions then? Do you think they don't kill people? And it's like, I'm not advocating for sanctions. I don't agree with the sanction policy, Trump's maximum pressure. I don't think it does good for Iran because, as I said, I saw what it's like, and the IRGC actually thrives under sanctions because they have a monopoly over Iran's every single economic sector, market sector. Like, they rule everything. And I think the reason why they started arresting and this crackdown of dual and foreign nationals at the height of JCPOA in 2015 was precisely because they didn't want foreigners in the country. Like, they do not want you to come and stand and live beside them. They do not want a JCPOA where foreigners come and invest in the country. For 40 years, Iran has been under some sort of sanctions, right? The people don't want sanctions. And you could argue that the officials also do not want sanctions. But you cannot dispute the fact that they are thriving because they have figured out ways for money laundering. They have figured out ways for their own criminal circles and networks. And they literally, like, they do not have to answer to anyone when it comes to market regulations because they run their whole, like, they're in charge of the territory. Whereas if you start JCPOA and then you have foreign delegations come in, and then you have huge companies like McDonald's, Apple, or all of these Western firms entering Iranian market, that means that the IRGC and their businesses are going to get a smaller profit margin because they can't do their own thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really not that hard to detect, and people, like, I think, of course, like, they do not want sanctions because, yes, they can't get oil revenue. They can't, they can't participate in the international market as much as they would definitely want to. But on the other hand, they are doing their thing as it is now. And if you go to Tehran, if you go to north of Tehran, if you go to Saadatabad, Tadrish, or like these wealthy neighborhoods in Tehran, like there are millionaires. Like there are some people who live in the clouds, in cloud 9, and then you come to southern Tehran and you have literally homeless people not knowing what to do with their lives. Iran is not a poor country, but the majority of the money is circulating within the hands of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the people who are closely affiliated with the IRGC.
Yeah, and it's been proven that when you put sanctions on a despotic country, it just makes the black market thrive as well. And, if a country is despotic, then they don't really give a shit about their people. So they're just going to carry on looking after themselves. Meanwhile, the people end up in a worse situation. The governments just carry on consolidating their money and power. Like, yeah, I'm not really one that understands the idea of like, oh, we put sanctions on them. Like, so what? They're already rogue. You know what I'm saying? Not that I want one country to bully everybody, but that's the reality of the world, and that's how it's happening. Tell me then about back to the situation where you found out you were sentenced to death. They wanted to literally murder you. Like, what the fuck was that like? That must have been horrible.
Well, yeah, it was. It was quite, I think, eye-opening, because at that point I really understood that the country is. At the time, I thought the country was just in shambles. But now I think they did that because they wanted to send out a shockwave, and for my relatives, particularly my grandfather, who I mentioned earlier, being a powerful figure that he was, for them to do something. So as you know, when I was going through this ordeal, my case was not publicized. And that happened for a very, very particular reason. So my lawyer, who was appointed by the court, and also the court staff and those intelligence officers that were supposedly part of the so-called entourage of my grandfather, or his security personnel, they all said that if your case or my case is publicized, it will be very bad for the image of the IRGC and the Islamic Republic. To say that a family member of someone who is part of the Islamic Republic has been convicted of spying for MI6 and all of those, like, it will just send out waves, and people will start speaking about how the ruling elite has turned against its own, basically. Or like, yeah. So, and I also, because I was arrested with my parents, I personally couldn't publicize it because I was in prison. My parents were in prison. And as you know, for any public campaign, in order to, campaign for someone's release, you need a very trustworthy and consistent person who's running the campaign. And we didn't have that because we were all arrested. So when in May 2016, in my hearing, one of my prosecutors, Nusrat Abadi, he said that we will be carrying out. So their verdict was that I had been found guilty and that I was going to be sentenced to death. My first reaction was, but I want to go back to London and finish my studies.
Wow.
And I remember Nusrat Abadi was like, the only place you will be going to is Jannat, which means heaven.
Wow.
And I said, I remember I just froze, and I kept repeating, but my studies, but I'm just a student, but I'm just 19, 20, And then I was taken back to Evin. And I remember, I was just in this complete state of numbness, Jake. I didn't feel anything. I couldn't think of anything. I wasn't numb to the circumstances as much as I was numb to how I had ended up there. because I was so aware that there must have been a misunderstanding, or that I was made out to be this fall guy for something that I didn't know I had become a part of. So I was just in my small cell, I was just trying to calculate what the hell went wrong. And I remember I was then transferred to an even smaller cell, and they told me that I have a few days to like think about my actions, and if I want to repent, I can like knock on the door and ask for the female guard to give me pen and paper, and like I still have a chance to tell them the truth and save my life.
Jesus.
And in the meantime, my mother and my grandfather and like my family, excluding my dad because he was still in detention, they were all trying to figure out how to get me out. So they had no idea that I had been sentenced to death. Which is kind of also what happened to Ruhul Azam, the journalist who was executed last month. His parents did not know he was going to be executed. And like they had just been told that, do you want to see your son? Like come in and just see him and you can go, like he's just in detention. And next thing they know, he's being executed and they've been called to come claim the corpse.
Fucking hell.
So like I think my mom and my grandfather knew that there was a risk that something could go wrong, and they were really trying to do things in a very like speedy manner. Because like I think my family history is just so multi-layered, but like I have to say this as well. So they knew what could go wrong because in 1983, my uncle, so the son of my grandfather, was executed because he was part of the leftist democratic groups. And he had been executed in Evin prison. And so I was technically the second generation that this was happening to. But unbeknownst to me, like I had no involvement in any political activity. So my grandfather and my mother were like supremely aware that the threat was imminent and real because it had happened to their family member before.
Right.
And I knew what had happened to my uncle some 20, 30 years ago. So I also knew that these people are not joking. Like it could happen at any moment. So on the day when I was taken out from my cell, the female guard said that put on your white chador and your blindfold because you've been asked to accompany your karshanas. Karshanas is the case expert, or like your case worker. And it was around like 3-4 a.m. dawn time. I'm taken out, like the air is so crispy. Like I just remember, like the air was so crisp, so fresh and chilly. And I'm just thinking, like, this is it. They put me in a van and they drive around for what felt like eternity, but I think it was like 10 minutes. And then we come out and then they take me to this, I mean, I don't know where it was because I had the blindfold on, but like I had to walk and they put like shackles in my, I don't know if it's called shackles, but like basically they handcuffs, that's it, right. So they handcuffed me and I had also my feet cuffed as well. So I was walking very slowly and I just remember like beneath my blindfold, I saw the officer that was walking before me, like he had a gun on his like the belt thing that they carry. And like through my mind, it just passed that maybe for a second or I don't know, like I just thought if I could just grab the gun and like have this Wild West climax before I die, because if they're gonna like execute me, then I might as well fight while I'm going through it. But then again, like I was so young, and it's, you know, I mean, I only mention that because I want you to imagine like how young and in a way like desperate I was. Like I was just thinking, if they're actually going to do this, like I might as well just do something. I can't just walk in and allow them to like kill me, you know? But then I thought, like, what are the chances? Like me in handcuffs, like reaching out to his gun, like, okay, it would be over in a second. Like it would just be very
You're not John
miserable
Wick,
and
you know what I mean?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so they it's just, oh yeah, it's like I feel disgusted even like thinking about that time because it just seems so surreal. But I was put on my knees and I don't know, I was praying for all the gods that exist out there. I was crying so hysterically. I don't exactly remember what was going through my mind. I just remember that I was so cold and just like wanted things to pause for a second, because I, even though like the solitary confinement had felt like an like 100 years, I felt like me being taken out of my cell and taken to that moment. Like I just thought life was literally just moving too fast, even though, as I just mentioned, the drive itself felt like eternity. So like there, I was going through many conflicting emotions, and you know, I mean, facing the potential threat of dying like is not easy. So if I struggle to put it in words, it's because there isn't really a way to put those feelings into words.
No, I couldn't even begin to imagine what that must be like. Like literally walking to what you thought was gonna be like your death. Like put you on the knees. Like what? Like what happened? Obviously they didn't kill you. Like what changed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm here. Luckily, you know, I made it. But so they put me on my knees. That's correct, and I still had my blindfold on, and I could hear the officers walking around. So I knew that in Evin, before people, many thousands had been killed on execution squads. But I didn't, like, I wasn't aware whether it would be by hanging or shooting. Like, I didn't know what the process would be like. But then I started hearing very distinct noises of like a gun being loaded, and kind of like the prep that would lead up to someone shooting you. And like for a good few minutes, like everything was complete silence. I could hear the sounds of the birds. Like it was so surreal, Jake. But then suddenly the officer got a call, and he came back to me and he said, listen, we're not going to do it today. It was your lucky day, but we're going to come back to it when we have time. And I just thought, are you like, is this a joke? Is there a hidden camera somewhere? Like, what is the name of this? And it's nothing but a mock execution. But for them to like go to that length to like literally make me see death before my eyes, it was just so grotesque. And that's why I will never forgive anyone who even tries to defend them, because they did that to me when I was in my teens.
Yeah.
And like imagine what they've done to thousands of others, but actually executed them. So for me, 2 + 2 is 4. So I don't understand how some people may make a different calculation. So yeah, and then they just drove me back to the cell, and for the next 1 week or so, I would say I was like a living dead person, because I felt like my soul had been absolutely crushed. And in many ways, I wished at that moment, and the few days that followed it, in many ways, I kind of felt like I would have been grateful had they actually shot me. Now, I know that sounds very hypocritical, but because I was genuinely so weak and so worn out. I just wanted things to end. Like I wanted a SWAT team to come through, or I want them to like just get over with it. You know, like I wanted it to end. That's it. Like whether it's by someone coming to rescue me or me meeting God, like I just wanted it to be over because it had dragged on for so many months, and day after day it was just continuous mental torment.
Yeah, I remember. It's not comparable, but you might kind of understand this. I remember when we got out of jail in Turkey. My friend, one of my codies, Phil, who I was in with, he said it was like watching our own funeral, and I kind of really understood what he meant. You know what I mean? Like, not even on the level of you at all, but like just seeing your life destroyed while you were alive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, completely. Like I did have many out of body experiences. Like I would, especially because when you have a blindfold on and you can't see anything, like you have to be able to visualize your surroundings without actually seeing them. So like you have a lot of like out of body moments where you feel like you're watching yourself from an outsider's viewpoint. Because essentially all you see is just pitch black, and sometimes you may be able to see beneath your blindfold, but that's literally it. So you have to like navigate where you're going, where you're coming from, like just based on all your other senses. And so I completely understand what your coworker, a journalist as well, what he said about like watching your own funeral, because that's exactly what it felt like. It's like watching yourself from afar, and like it's actually a very disorienting feeling. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine.
I mean, honestly, I can't. Not. I mean, there was one or two times. There was one guy in the car, like, he cocked his pistol and was like, "I could kill you now. I just have to say you went for my gun." Like, but there was nothing close to what you've experienced. I don't know how you're just okay. Like, how have you dealt with all of this?
Well, I wasn't okay, Jake. When I came back in May 2018, I pretended everything was normal. Like I pretended nothing had happened, and I could have just carried on living because nobody, as I said, like no mainstream media knew about it. Um, but I had so many difficult moments. As I said, like I couldn't speak with anyone. I had so many trust issues. I ended up in hospital for 4 months, like as an inpatient, because all the psychological, like I had a war literally inside my head, and all of that was translating into physical manifestations where my body was not working properly. Like as I mentioned earlier, my heart was going 300, 350, and I had 3 ablations where they burn, like they create soft tissue in your heart. None of it helped. Like I still kept having it. um I would collapse in my student accommodation, and like I would have the reception come check on me because they had been given information that like they had to knock on my door, either on a suicide watch or to check if I had like died of something else, or like maybe like I don't know, like harmed myself or something. Like it, things were very, very dark. um but then I kept hearing the news about Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe and Aras Amiri and like other cases coming up, and I realized that I don't have the power in me to stay silent anymore. I realized like in order to be able, like in order to repress your truth and your feelings and your experience, you need great discipline and power, and I just didn't have it in me. And so I went to a friend of mine. She's a journalist, works for Channel 4. And I said, Janet, this is what happened to me. Do you think I should go public with it? Um, and then, and then that's kind of how it all started. And I feel like after I spoke out on what I went through, an entire weight of the world I felt like was lifted from my chest, because I felt like I wasn't carrying this like incredibly painful experience with me everywhere I went. And also I was helping others make sense of what they were going through too, because now, as we know, Iran has arrested at least 30 known cases. Of course, there are plenty that we don't know, as like my case, nobody knew it when I was there. So there are at least 30 known cases of dual nationals being held in Iran. So like I feel like having this larger than life purpose has made me much more focused and obviously motivated as well, because now I see that everything that you go through, however traumatizing, you can use it for something creative is one way of looking at it, but also as a form of community building and being able to bond with other people who have stories of survival. So, for example, I have collaborated, and I'm a really good friend of Sarah Mardini. She was a Syrian refugee, and her sister is like an Olympian swimmer, Yusra Mardini. Like we just bonded over our trauma. She fled war, she fled persecution, and she swam her way to Europe. Like she didn't even come in a dinghy. She like literally swam. And she's also quite well known. So, but like I realized that if you have a source of vulnerability or a story that is so profound, it can only make your connections and like ability to empathize with others stronger and deeper, really. So I'm really just trying to look at the positive side of it, because if we start thinking about the damage it has done, like it's just so colossal that I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, no, I can understand. I know you don't have much time, but can you just explain quickly, like, how you got out? Like, how did you actually, not get killed and was released and got back to the UK?
Yeah, so that part is a bit more complicated, and it actually doesn't get much media attention because the media just wants an easy answer, which is like, oh yeah, a US diplomat came and took me out of Evin, and I walked on red carpet and I just flew back in a private jet. No, it's not like that at all. It was much more complicated than that in my case. But so basically in August 2016, I was released on bail pending trial. And I had already had a trial, but like as with everything in Iran, you had retrials, you had new hearings, you could appeal your verdict. Like everything is just like made to seem like they're following some official protocol, but everything is really to do with connections and who you are able to persuade into doing you a favor and whatnot. So like after I was released on bail, the bail was 1 milliard toman, which at the time was the price of an apartment in Tehran. So imagine like a flat in central London. Like that was my bail. Excessive. I come out, and it was excessive because they argued that national security inmates are not allowed on bail. And then, anyway, that like my mother was able to negotiate around it. But so long story short, I came out on bail. I was under house arrest for about a year. And in October 2017, I was informally told that I had been acquitted because the crimes I had committed had occurred when I was under 18. Now, it's not like they care if you're under 18 or over 18, but they had to make themselves look like the good guys. And I remember one of the judges saying, we could have sentenced you to 10 years in prison or to 2 years in prison, which was kind of, so my death penalty was then commuted to 10 years. And after that, it was brought down to 2 years. So like they made references to them because my sentence had been officially commuted a few times. But then he said, we didn't sentence you to prison because we realized that when you come out of prison, nobody would want to marry you because like men don't want to marry girls that have been to prison. And I was just thinking to myself, that is such bullshit. But yeah, so like excuses to kind of, hey, we're the good people and we did this on goodwill, and your freedom is at our discretion. So if you go out and try to be rebellious or whatsoever, like you are back in square one. And so I filed an official complaint at the court after I had been acquitted. Um, because I wanted them to know like how badly I had been treated in Evin. And I remember one of the clerks, or like the secretaries, he said, I think you should withdraw the complaint for your own safety.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like good advice. I certainly would not be, I wouldn't be saying anything. I'd be like, thank you very much, see you later.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, like I thought if they want to be like the good guys, they should also know what's happening, right? Basically, what they wanted to show you is that they don't know what's going on in Evin because the interrogations are orchestrated by the IRGC, whereas judiciary is like impartial and independent. And obviously, that's not true, but that's the image they wanted to give out. But so anyway, so yeah, so I was acquitted October 2017, but I was still under a travel ban. And at the very end, so in February 2018, my dad was also released, also on bail. And the IRGC basically made us an offer that we didn't have the option of refusing, which was they would equip us with new passports, Iranian passports, and we would be able to leave the country if we are willing to. Basically, it wasn't this straightforward, but this is what they implied essentially, is that if we are willing to give up everything we have in Iran. So our bail would be confiscated, and a few quite like large lands that my dad had inherited from his dad. And same with my mom. And obviously from my mom's side, because of my grandfather's position, like they're quite, they personally have a lot of personal wealth, but like I don't, but my mom does as well. So like if my mom also gives out everything that she has, so essentially it was illegal extortion of private wealth, and that's how they it's like it's very transactional. So you give us money and your assets, and we give you your freedom.
So basically just stealing all of your money that your whole family have had for a long time, and then you can go.
Yeah, and it's a very difficult choice that many do not make, because I do know that there was another case with an American Iranian and a Canadian Iranian couple where they were told that, so they were quite wealthy art collectors, and their bail was set at $10 million. And clearly they had that type of money, so the IRGC deliberately targeted them. And so they were coerced into giving up their entire wealth in Iran, including the $10 million bail, in order for them to be able to leave the country, which is what they did, because they didn't have, they couldn't say no and like risk returning back to Evin and going through all that shit that they did go through. So, but I do know that there are others that are less reluctant, because not everybody has, a stable home in the UK, or some people literally build their whole life in Iran. For example, Camille Ahmadi, who last month escaped Iran from the mountainous border, like by literally like was smuggled out. Like for example, him. He didn't want to do it because he had lived in Iran for the past 15 years. He had like built his whole reputation as a scholar, and all his property was in Iran. He had he has nothing in the UK apart from having a British nationality, which he had got like 2 decades ago. So, but eventually he had to make the decision because he was sentenced to 9 years. So it's like one way or other, the IRGC will get what they want, which is money. And yeah, and they just know the ways to get there.
So you just basically just after all that, you got on a plane home.
Well, yeah. So for me, my travel ban was lifted earlier than my parents, and because of my medical condition, and like there was an urgency for me to get proper needed medical advice and stuff, so they allowed me to leave earlier before my parents, and I left on an emergency passport because it was like an emergency situation. And yeah, so it was a plane back home, but with my parents, like my dad had been strictly advised to go by land because they had negotiated with the people in the Sero border to like allow him out. So like it's very shady, you know. This is like why I think when it comes to negotiating with Iran or like anything to do with future agreements, like you need to take into consideration that it is not a normal government. Like you have a multi-layered regime that essentially has a deep state, it has a facade, it has like these so-called diplomats that are mouthpieces to something that is actually much deeper, and like you can't see it because it's not out in your plain sight. But yeah, as I said, some people don't want to believe it and others deliberately ignore it.
Yeah. I can't believe how strong you are considering all of this happened. Just remind me, how long were you inside in the end? Like, how long did all this last in prison?
So I was in prison for 8 months and under house arrest for a year. In total, though, listen, I need to put it out there because I know you might just be like, oh, 8 months, that's doable. No, this whole saga lasted for 4 years. That's 4 years of my life I'm never getting back. And at the prime of my youth, from 19 till 23. So like, I don't want anyone coming to me and saying 8 months is nothing. Like, don't make a big deal out of it. Actually, it was life-changing and not in a good way.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is going to be saying, oh God, only 8 months in one of the worst prisons on earth. Like, you know, like 8 minutes is too much, especially when you're completely innocent. Where can people find you if they want to, like, you know, see what you're doing on social media and follow your work and that?
So if you want to follow me on social media, I am on Twitter at I am Anna Diamond. Anna is written with one N, so ANA Diamond. And it's the same account name on Instagram as well.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jake.
That was Anna Diamond speaking about the horrific situation when she was sent to Evin prison in Iran for doing absolutely fuck all. I think it's important to tell these stories. Recently there's been people in the news that have been arrested, released, captured, all sorts of stuff happening in totalitarian regimes like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, all over the world. I think it's important to shine a light on these situations because, as we said in the episode, a lot of people can kind of detach the human element of such horrible circumstances. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. There's loads there on the Patreon. Bonus episodes, at least 2 a month. Extras, like, I've completely forgotten what else is on there. There's sneak peeks to the new Armenia documentary, like, on there already. There's stuff that's already out on there. Narrated articles, Q&As. There's a whole series called Too Cool for J School. Basically, I mean, the name's a joke, but the concept isn't. Basically, we're saying, like, if you want to learn about stuff to do with journalism, you can do so with this series. There's no need to spend all your money on some kind of bullshit course. You can just get it on patreon.com/popularfront. If you are a Bitcoin millionaire or something like that, you can support us at popularfront.co/support. Our Bitcoin address is there. PayPal, all sorts. You can do that. Check us out. Thank you to our sponsors. This episode was sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. Thank you very much. The episode is also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. There's one in South, one in West. Check them out on social media at Grindcore House. The episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, Propagandopolis. They're an outlet selling and informing people about historical conflict propaganda. Get prints at propagandopolis.com and use the code POPULARFRONT10 for a discount, 10% off, obviously. As I said, if you want to support us, the best way to do it is on the Patreon, patreon.com/popularfront. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, youtube.com/popularfront. We've got the Armenia documentary, the Artsakh-Karabakh, whatever you want to call it, the documentary from the front lines, looking at the whole situation. That will be coming out by the end of February. I hope. We're on track, but making documentaries, there's a lot of fucking work to it, but yeah, I'm thinking it's gonna be done by the end of February. I'm editing it myself, so it's a lot of work to do all this and Popular Front as well, but anyway, I'm not complaining. Hopefully by the end of February. Follow us on Instagram at popular.front, Twitter at popularfrontco. You can check me out, jakehanrahan.com, HANRAHAN. All my stuff is there on social medias, Jake_Hanrahan. Check us out on all the platforms. Thank you very much to the high tier Patreons. Thank you, because without all you lot, honestly, this would fall to bits. Thank you to Dallas Dunn, MJ, K Glitter Vulcan, Meredith Waters, Bethany Swoveland, C. O'Donnell, Adam H, Ryan Barbadillo, Damian Boyd, Larson8669, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamond Steen, Jacob, Michael O'Connor, Taylor Kidd, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Alexander, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Cully, Michael Akakan, Ethan, Fitzmadrid, Joe Watt, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Clayton Taylor, Helen Degenerate, Mike Barone, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano. That is fucking good, that. Helen Degenerate. Like Degenerous. Anyway. Degenerate Zero Alpha, Jojo Arani, DR, Trey Nance, Charlie, Amy R, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawai Is, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Moody Al Rashid, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Surushe Hawazi, Tony Bin, Adam Berg-Snyder, Sebastian from the Discord, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarak, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, Moritz Zumwall, and Kay Hardy Roberts. Thank you all so much. Definitely appreciate it. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black. Check out his music at samblackpf.com.